Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Stacy Flair, and I am a principal and senior consultant at NEPC focused on our private wealth practice. At NEPC, one of our key investment themes for 2025 is world affairs, and in an environment shaped by rising geopolitical tensions, a global election supercycle, and a growing tilt towards protectionist policies, investors face a complex and rapidly evolving landscape. These dynamics have the potential to increase market volatility, complicate policy responses, and challenge conventional investment assumptions. To help navigate this critical moment, we are honored to welcome Admiral Jim Stavridis. Admiral Stavridis is Vice Chair for Global Affairs and a partner at Carlyle, where he focuses on international strategy and geopolitical risks. Prior to joining Carlyle, he served as the 16th Supreme Allied Commander at NATO, where he oversaw operations in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, the Balkans, Africa, and the Arctic, as well as efforts in cybersecurity and counter-piracy. After retiring from the Navy, Admiral Stavridis served as the 12th Dean of the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University and currently chairs the board of the Rockefeller Foundation. Admiral Stavridis holds a PhD and Master of Arts in Law and Diplomacy from Tufts University, and he is a graduate of the Naval Academy and the National War College. So excited to have you with us, Admiral. We are grateful again to have you here today. And the way that this is going to work this morning is the Admiral will talk for probably about 20 minutes or so, give us his insights, and then we really want to make this interactive and direct the conversation where you'd like it to go. So please do put chat questions in. There, you should have a chat function on your screen that said little question in the upper right-hand panel. It says questions. And we will address those after the presentation. So with that, Admiral, I will turn over to you.
Thank you, Stacy. Wonderful to be with NEPC and all the folks on the call. Very turbulent times, obviously. Let's kind of walk around the world. I'll look at some of the current crises that are facing us globally. And then what I'd like to do is give you three uncertainties that you really want to watch as investors. And then I'll conclude with, okay, here are 5 or 6 things that I think are a pretty good bet, despite all the uncertainty that's out there. So I'll do all that in about 20 minutes. And then we'll have time, as Stacy said, for some questions, comments, and we can make it as interactive as the audience would like. Let me start in the Middle East. This is a region of the world that's been on fire, quite obviously, for over 18 months. Began in October a year ago with a vicious attack on Israel by a terrorist group, Hamas. This was followed by an Israeli response, a strong one, into Gaza. As a result of this population, unfortunately, is caught between Hamas and the Israeli Defense Forces, 2.2 million Gazans, about half of them under the age of 18. It is a population that is being pushed around the Gaza Strip as the combat continues between Israel and Hamas. Most tragically, many have been killed. The population is not receiving sufficient food and medical care, and it's an evolving humanitarian crisis. On top of that, it's a hostage crisis. Many hostages, 300 or so, were taken by Hamas. The majority of those have either died in captivity, tragically, or have been released. A handful have escaped or been rescued. At the moment, there are probably about 60 hostages. Again, tragically, probably only about 30 of them are still alive. So it's a humanitarian crisis, it's a warfighting zone, and it is a hostage crisis, kind of packed into a small place. Gaza is only 20 miles north to south, 5 miles east to west. Uh, how does this end? Well, 2 months ago, we thought we could see a glimmer of hope. There was a ceasefire. A significant number of hostages were released as a result of that. There were ongoing negotiations, but that all fell apart. And now we're kind of back to where we were a couple of months ago, which is to say, looks like we're going to see full-on combat operations, and the Israelis notably are activating tens of thousands of reserve soldiers, many of whom have already fought, were sent home, and are now being recalled to active duty. Some in the war cabinet in Israel are talking about conquering Gaza and permanently annexing it. So hopes that we had a couple of months ago for a reasonable resolution seem to be very, very slender at best. So what happens next? And what does this mean for us as investors? First, we ought to continue to hope that there can be some kind of negotiation. I think at this point, the red lines are pretty stark on both sides. The Israelis are adamant that they will destroy Hamas. I think the only way that could happen would be for Hamas to effectively say, we are dismantling this organization and we need a passage out of here. And they go off to Qatar, for example. On the other side of the coin, Hamas is adamant that Israel will have no authority within Gaza. That's pretty far apart in terms of negotiation. So unfortunately, my prediction at the moment is that combat is going to continue. The chances of a diplomatic resolution are low. And that brings us to, okay, what does this mean in the larger frame of the Middle East as we approach and think about investments? There's not much good news to report, obviously, in the Middle East, but I'll give you 2 or 3 things that make it still a place where investors can comfortably move forward. One is the gradual diminishment of Iranian capability. The Iranians have been denuded of their proxies. Hamas as a military force is very limited at this point. Up north, Hezbollah, same situation. The state of Syria has been largely taken off the chessboard because of turmoil and the departure of the dictator Bashar al-Assad. And even the Houthis down on the Red Sea, also Iranian proxies, may, I emphasize may, let's hope it's true, have come to an agreement with the United States to stop attacking shipping. So point is, Iran has many, many fewer options than they did 18 months ago. For investors, that's good news. It means that you can feel more confident investing in and with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, UAE, Egypt, Jordan. The chances of a wide war in the Middle East between Iran and Israel are now actually reduced because of Iranian weakness. The remaining uncertainty is the Iranian nuclear program. If the Iranians continue to push forward on that, eventually Israel, perhaps with the United States, will strike that nuclear program. That'll reflame everything. But for the moment, I think we're in a state where we can move forward investing in Israel, in cyber, investing in the kingdom, investing with UAE for oil and natural gas. We don't worry at this moment, at least, of Iran in a wider war closing the Strait of Hormuz or attacking the Saudi oil fields. So cautionary lights, humanitarian concerns in Gaza, no clear resolution for Gaza, but the general investment climate, I think, is reasonable, again, compared to where we were 18 months ago, a year ago, when you could foresee a much wider war in the region. Okay, let's jump to Ukraine and Russia, another obviously significant global hotspot. Here you're seeing the two sides both preparing for negotiations. And it doesn't always feel that way because missiles are flying and drones are striking and there's angry rhetoric, quite understandably, on both sides. But if you really look at the situation tactically, the Russians are in firm military control of about 20% of Ukraine. That's Crimea, the 4 provinces of Donbass that connect Crimea to the motherland, the Rodina, Mother Russia. Russia has that 20%. They're not going to let that go anytime soon. On the other hand, Ukrainians, despite some battlefield incremental losses, appear to my military eye to be in a pretty strong defensive position as long as they continue to get military and financial support. They will certainly be getting that from Europe. And over the last couple of weeks, it increasingly looks as though Team Trump is going to maintain some level of support to Ukraine. The minerals deal, a pretty big deal in that regard. So both sides, both Putin and Zelensky, have a really bad burn rate, if you know the term from private equity. Both of them are burning through resources, burning through people and troops, and therefore their motivation to negotiate is, I think, kind of rising as the year goes on. So with 70% confidence, not overwhelming, but 70%, I think the chances of getting to a negotiation with an attendant ceasefire sometime in the next 3 to 6 to 8 months, not bad chances. I kind of like Mr. Witkoff's chances here. So let's see if these two can come together. Okay, what does all that mean for us as investors? If that 70% ceasefire deal kind of looks like what you see now in terms of territory, what does it mean? Well, it means sanctions will come largely off of Russia as part of that deal. That means Russia could become an opportunity for oil, gas purchases, most obviously. Some companies may consider going back into Russia. I don't think anybody's going to be rushing back. But when the sanctions come off, it opens some investment in Russia. But here's what I'd really focus you on: Ukrainian reconstruction. The 80% of Ukraine, with a lot of European support and potentially with some Russian money that's locked up in Western banks, will eventually achieve, I think, a very significant reconstruction. Think South Korea at the end of the Korean War, a destroyed battlefield. 10 years later, it's really on the move. And by 25 years later, it's the 10th largest economy in the world. Ukraine could really expand coming out of this. That Ukrainian investment, for example, is something we are looking at the Carlyle Group. And again, the minerals deal that the Trump administration inked creates a kind of framework for ongoing commercial activity. So there's a quick snapshot of Ukraine. And then I'll conclude by talking a little bit about Asia. So in Asia, of course, the main issue is US and China. And here we see a great deal of tension at the moment, obviously, most critically in our world over trade and tariffs that are correctly categorized at the moment, at least, as a trade war between the United States and China. Will that ease? Well, let's step back from the trade and tariff issues and look at the underlying geopolitics of US-China. They're not good. We've got China continuing to intrude in US cyber activities. This is the Volt Typhoon. If you're not familiar with that, Google it. And by the way, the US does an awful lot of offensive cyber in China as well. Kind of goes both ways. But there's a shadowy cyber war that's in progress. Number two, Taiwan. Disagreements about what's going to happen to this vibrant democracy, which is a well-defended island, but could be overwhelmed by China. And China, of course, believes fervently that Taiwan is an integral part of China. That's a real disagreement, shall we say, between the United States and China. Here's one perhaps you haven't focused on that you should. It's the status of the South China Sea. This is a vast body of water It is half the size of the continental United States of America, South China Sea. Here's the punchline. China claims it as territorial seas, meaning they own it, sovereign territory, like the U.S. claims 12 miles of sovereign territory off our shores. Almost every nation in the world claims 12 miles of territorial seas. China claims an area half the size of the United States, and they want it because it's full of oil, gas, fisheries, and 40%, that's 40% of the world's shipping passes through the South China Sea. It's a geographic and geopolitical prize. So the point is, U.S. and China have a lot of geopolitical disagreements, shall we say. They've both got big naval fleets that are kind of banging heads all over the Pacific. And as we started, they're in the middle of at least the beginning of a trade war. So how's all that going to come out? Again, hard to predict. I'd say it's going to take months, not weeks, before we can kind of unwind the trade war piece of this. And if we can and get tariffs down to kind of 20% range, that's manageable, especially if it's predictable. And therefore, we would get back to that underlying geopolitical tension. And again, I think that can be managed without these two massive nations stumbling into a war. But it is worth focusing on. And I'll conclude with a book recommendation. 4 years ago, I wrote a novel called 2034, like the year 2034, a novel of the next world war. It's about the U.S. and China stumbling into a global conflict. Shamelessly, I'll recommend it to you if you want to understand kind of the dark side of the spectrum. 2034, a novel of the next world war. I think we've got a 80%, 90% chance of arriving at a modus vivendi with China, but it's going to be very bumpy over the coming months. All right, I promised I'd give you 3 uncertainties and a handful of good bets. I'll do that in 2 minutes as we wrap up this portion and I bring Stacy in for questions and answers. 3 big uncertainties. Number 1, obviously, trade and tariffs. We're all focused on that. I think the U.S. pretty quickly will get to agreements with the low-hanging fruit, if you will. I think that's India, Japan, South Korea, the United Kingdom, many smaller countries. I think you're going to see a kind of a rollout of a lot of tariff deals over the coming weeks and months. Those will be relatively easy. We talked about China, the kind of longer term game. I think that's unpredictable. That's months, certainly not weeks. What's in the middle? In the middle is Mexico and Canada as a kind of discrete package. I think that'll be resolved by renegotiating NAFTA, which is now called USMCA and will probably be called the Big Beautiful Trade Deal in this administration. But I think you'll see a renegotiation of that. It'll take some number of months to do it. But in the meantime, hopefully we can kind of pause the tariff battles here on the North American continent. So that one's kind of parked in the middle. Here's the one to watch, investors. It's the U.S.-European Union trade deals. Those, I think, are going to be surprisingly tough. And here, don't be surprised if you see the Europeans kind of take another look at how close we want to get to China. Hey, show me that Belt and Road deal again one more time. Or don't be surprised to see the Europeans, in a trade perspective, draw much closer to Canada or to Mexico or both of them. I could see the Europeans trying to poach U.S. trade deals for their own benefit. So that's one to watch as investors. It's uncertainty. That's trade and tariffs. Uncertainty number 2, how far are these deportations going to go? If we round up 1 million really bad actors and deport them, I think most Americans would agree that's a good thing. If you try to round up 10 million who are here illegally, but constitute 40% of our agrarian workers, 30% of the hospitality workers, 30% of the construction trades, that's going to have economic impact. So watch the deportations and hope they kind of slow down as we get through the bad actors at the front end of the tranche. And then third and finally, isolationism. How far will the United States go in kind of moving away from the world? Are we going to pull out of NATO? Are we going to stop funding the United Nations? Are we going to get out completely of the World Health Organization? We don't know how far that trend is going to go, but the more it goes, the harder it'll be. Paragraph 1, trade and tariff deals, going to be more challenging. So those are three uncertainties I'm watching as an investor. You should as well. Final thought, some things I think are pretty good bets. Defense spending is going to be a good bet. It's going to go up all over the world, particularly as people become less reliant on the United States, less confident about a U.S. response in their moment of crisis. So look for defense spending to go up. It'll go up here in the United States. It'll really go up in Europe. It's already gone up significantly in Japan, for example, which doubled its defense budget. Number 2, cyber security. We have 275 portfolio companies in Carlyle. We're doing deep dives on every one of them to make sure that all of them are cyber secure to the degree we can make them in this era of turbulence going back and forth. Number 3, India. I think India is going to be a very good bet, particularly with U.S.-China tensions and lumpiness in that relationship. The connectivity of India, both to the West and also to the larger global South, quite significant. As we do this webinar, of course, India, Pakistan are really knocking heads over the Kashmir. I think that'll settle down. We ought to hope so. Both are nuclear armed. Let's hope that one doesn't escalate. Regardless, India remains a pretty good bet. And then fourth and finally, I'll stop here. I think another good bet is going to be in energy rewiring. Not just drill, baby, drill, but also the way in which energy flows are going to be shifting, particularly if and when Russia comes back from sanctions. What does that mean for oil trade? What does it mean for LNG on the sea? There are going to be investment opportunities there, risks as well, but you can pretty well count on continuing flux in energy that creates both risk and opportunity. So I'll stop there, Stacy, and turn it over to you for any questions you or our friends on the webinar might have.
All right, Admiral, thank you so much. Just a lot to digest as we've walked around the globe there. I think the first question we had is, kind of all over the news currently regarding India and Pakistan and the conflict that's going on there. Would you mind sharing your thoughts on that?
I will, and I've been living on CNN the last few days doing so. Let's start with the bad news, the risky part of this. These are two huge countries. India is 1.4 billion. Pakistan is the 5th largest country in the world, just behind the United States, Indonesia, India, and China, obviously. So huge populations. They have been to war 4 times in the last 50 years. Pakistan has lost all of those. They have also had significant exchanges of combat, missiles, terrorist attacks over the last couple of decades as well. Continuing the bad news theme, leaders in both places, both Narendra Modi of India is a staunch Hindi nationalist, has no love for Pakistan, and going the other way, the real de facto leader of Pakistan at the moment is the chief of staff of the Pakistani army, who has made very bellicose statements since this crisis unfolded. So all of that is kind of the bad news. And the really bad news, as I mentioned, both of these countries are nuclear armed. They both have 170 to 180 nuclear weapons. So it's a very dangerous, volatile situation. However, my assessment with 80 to 90% confidence is that we're not going to escalate this, certainly not to a nuclear exchange. We could get to the point of more airstrikes, more artillery going back and forth. Even that, I think, is not likely to ascend to the highest levels of conflict. And the reason is because both countries recognize at the end of the day the economic cost for them are going to be significant. Number two reason I don't think it'll go a lot further is because many of the nations to whom these nations, India and Pakistan, listen, are leaning in right now. Team Trump is leaning in with Modi. Beijing is leading in with Pakistan. They're a significant sponsor of Pakistan. And even Russia, which has a lot of influence with India, is leaning in. Nobody wants a war at the top of the world. So I'm reasonably confident, kind of 80%, that this won't go super high order. And I'm extremely confident the nuclear weapons will stay where they are.
Oh, yeah, that's definitely a concern. So good to hear your perspective on that. So shifting, I guess, from that situation back into between the U.S. and China, what are some signs that the U.S. and China are working well together?
Well, I think there are very few, to be candid with you. I'll start with some signs that they're not working well together and some indicators that as investors, you might want to keep an eye on. One is the degree to which the Chinese are kind of circling Taiwan. They have a shadow blockade around the island right now. They conduct a lot of military exercises. How many Chinese aircraft sorties are coming into Taiwanese claimed airspace? How many ships are engaged in around the island blockade? Those are hard numbers. They're available with a little bit of digging on the internet. I'd be watching that closely. I'd also be watching, again, not a good indicator, but I'd be watching what is going on in the South China Sea. How many Chinese and Filipino Coast Guard ships are banging heads over these reefs and artificial islands? Again, numbers you can track. And a third one to watch, I mentioned earlier, are cyber incidents. Those have kind of diminished of late, but again, you can track this, and you ought to be looking metrically at the if you will, counter indicators of cooperation. In terms of things I'm watching that give me some hope, just announced after a lot of back and forth from Team Trump saying, oh, we're talking to China already. Chinese saying, no, you're not. We're not talking to you. Back and forth arguments. Now both sides have agreed to hold trade talks in a neutral site in Geneva, Switzerland, kind of the capital of world peace, capital of neutrality. It's symbolic. So obviously, all signs of progress from that will be good for investors. So watch those talks. A second positive indicator, hasn't happened yet, but we can hope it does, would be an actual phone call, a conversation between President Trump and President Xi. That's a second one I'm anxiously waiting for. And then thirdly, in terms of positives, I'd look for delegations. Is there a Chinese trade delegation coming to Washington? Is the U.S. New ambassador getting put in place and presenting credentials? Look for back and forth diplomatic engagement. Those are signs that things are not going to end up in an immediate break, a decoupling. I think all those are reasonable signs. I'll add a fourth one. It's a little hard to get the data on it, but is China selling dollars? That is much speculated about, particularly when we saw this very strange, counterintuitive departure from the dollar at the same time the tariffs were being announced. Some speculated this was China, which has about $1 trillion in US dollars they hold, might have been selling, could have been others. Watch for the dollar, and is it going up or down? And if it is stabilizing, that tells you Beijing is not selling a lot of dollars. That's probably a good thing, another good indicator to watch. So there's both some good and some bad things to watch.
Got it. Got it. Thank you so much, Admiral. Some questions kind of shifting back into the U.S. You mentioned in your comments excited about defense spending, certainly something NEPC has been looking at recommending strategies to our clients as well. But some thoughts about Doge impact, perhaps. How
Yeah.
will Doge cuts impact innovation and investment in defense and government service related companies? And then related to that, if you have any comments about Elon Musk's role in the administration going forward, and Doge and his impact if he leaves on Doge.
Yeah, I think it's becoming increasingly clear. It's kind of too soon to declare Doge a spent force or a performative exercise. I think there are clearly tens of thousands of people who have lost their jobs or who will lose their jobs. I think there are contracts that are going to be terminated. Doge will certainly be remembered as having a lot of kind of initial impact. And Elon Musk was certainly very front and center. I feel the energy going out of both of those. I think from Elon Musk's perspective, he is increasingly, I believe correctly, feels he better get back to tending his knitting. Tesla really struggling, really a branding issue as a result of Elon's work for the government. And you can like that or lump it, but the reality is the market is passing judgment on that. And he also has big plans for SpaceX and other enterprises that he controls. I think you're going to see Elon Musk do a victory lap, declare a big win, and get back to running his various enterprises, where I think personally his efforts are better spent, shall we say. In terms of Doge, I think it'll kind of linger on as a force in the U.S. Government, the body politic, but I think its initial impact has, I don't want to say peaked, but it'll probably grind away for a while. But I don't think it's going to be the game changer that was advertised. Don't forget, Elon Musk started by saying we're going to cut $2 trillion out of the U.S. defense. That was quickly reduced to $1 trillion. Now it's floating down around $500 billion as a pledge. And last time I looked at the website, it's about $170 billion, a lot of which is challenged by outside observers in actual savings. That's not a huge amount. So I don't lay awake at night worried about Doge taking apart the entire government. I think its force is going down somewhat. I think, in fairness to Elon Musk and Doge, any organization, particularly one as big as the U.S. government, can certainly take a 10% cut. But boy, sometimes how you do something is as important as what you're trying to do. And the arbitrariness of the approach, I think, is what soured many people on what ought to be a pretty good idea of reducing in the government. So the bottom line is look for continued activity by Doge. I think it'll cap at maybe a 10% kind of level. I think it may already have hit that point, and Elon Musk, as the face of Doge, I think is going to kind of sail off into the setting sun. We'll see.
Got it. Thank you. Kind of staying with the U.S. administration here. Question related to the Defense Department: does Hexas' important role lead us closer to conflict, and how bad are the signal leaks?
The signal leaks, for anybody who's served in uniform or even been in the government and held a security clearance, are very significant. To have put highly classified information on an unclassified circuit like signal, it's got some minimal level of protection once it's in cyber. But the problem is you get it on signal by using your cell phone, using your unprotected laptop on your desk, and those are highly vulnerable. And so it is a very significant breach of security, and there's a significant, I think it'll be important, investigation being done by the Department of Defense Inspector General. I think that'll come out with a great deal of embarrassment for the individuals who put that information out. You've already seen Congressman Waltz moved from National Security Advisor to the United Nations. I think there are other shoes to drop with Signal. In terms of Secretary Hegseth, he seems very focused on, in his words, rooting out DEI, rooting out woke leaders. I'm not sure that's the essence of what being a Secretary of Defense is. As Secretary of Defense, and by the way, I spent over 2 years as, in effect, the military chief of staff to Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld. So I know that office. I know that role very well. It's an incredibly hard job. What Secretary Hegseth, in my view, ought to be focused on is creating deterrence in the minds of our enemies, ensuring that the Pentagon's financial systems are in order. It's never had a clean audit. Can you imagine that as a company with a budget of almost $1 trillion, never had a clean audit? That would be something I would be really focused on as SecDef. Number 3, technology, getting artificial intelligence to the battlefield, getting drones into the fight, creating lasers so that we can actually create this golden dome. I think there are plenty of things out there on the priority list that if I were advising Secretary Hegseth, I'd encourage him to take a harder look at. Is he more prone to get us into conflict? I don't think so. I think the Trump administration, as a general proposition, leans back from using military force in general. They went after the Houthis, but it appears they may have, in doing so, created a ceasefire. They are not rushing to attack the Iranian nuclear facilities. They are trying to get both sides on the Ukraine war to come to the table and negotiate. So I don't see the administration, broadly speaking, as one that leans toward conflict. I think Hegseth kind of falls into that camp. So no, I don't think he is one to look for a conflict. I wish he were looking at the other things I talked about and perhaps a little less focused on the cultural issues inside the Department of Defense.
Got it. Thank you. So we're going to, I know for everyone that's asking questions, thank you so much. This is great. We do have just a few more minutes with the Admiral to ask questions, and I have a couple more. So hopefully we'll get through the rest of these. Maybe shifting over to Europe, if you could just talk about your views and outlook, I guess, for Europe. And then a related question, since we're looking at Ukraine as an area of conflict, is there any chance of a ceasefire in Ukraine without Crimea staying in Russian hands?
To the latter question, unfortunately, no. And I say that as a military officer. The Russians are deeply dug in militarily. The idea of Ukraine mustering sufficient force to militarily eject them is de minimis. It's extremely unlikely. That's tragic. I hate it. The Ukrainians hate it. History will hate it. But I don't see it happen militarily. And at least as long as Vladimir Putin is alive and the leader of Russia, I don't see it politically either. He's staked his entire legacy, his entire leadership role in Russia on Crimea and the 4 provinces of Donbass. That's 20% of Ukraine. It's a tragedy. I hate it. But I think the reality is what you see is going to be what you get in terms of a final settlement. In terms of Europe generally, that's a smart and perceptive question. People ask me, oh my God, Admiral, who's going to win the trade war? US or China? Could be Europe. Europe could win the trade war. What I mean by that is that the Europeans, will see at this moment that they find the US a much less reliable partner. That will cause them to draw together, to find that will, that determination, that unification that they've lacked for centuries, for millennia. Europe is only now kind of coming together. If they do, don't forget, Europe's 450 million people to our 350 million people. Europe has the same positive values: democracy, liberty, capitalism, freedom of speech, gender equality, racial equality, good value set. Number 3, The European economy is the second largest in the world, just after the United States, collectively measured, well ahead of China's. And then number four, defense spending. Europeans already, even as they're increasing defense spending, the European defense budget collectively is the second largest in the world. It's bigger than China's. So Europe has a lot going for it. They're looking less to the United States because of tariffs and the way they feel they're being badly treated from Washington. They'll look to cut different deals. From their perspective, the U.S. is not the only game in town. They will try and kind of play off the U.S. and China. I think things could go well for Europe if they can find that will to draw closer together. They've always had the capacity. Will this moment draw them together? You'll get different views on that. I wouldn't bet against Europe.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, I think we have time for one more question. And so we're going to hop back to North America and talk a little bit about Canada, which has definitely been in the news, the U.S.-Canada relationship. So, looking at the way that Canada has reacted to the tariff situation, avoiding U.S. products, what are your thoughts on Canada and U.S. getting to a deal? And what are your thoughts about Canadians, once again, engaging with the U.S. products?
Well, first, a disclosure, if you will. I own a home in Canada. I love Canada. My place is just outside of Halifax, kind of on the upper right-hand corner of Canada, Nova Scotia on the Atlantic, one of the most beautiful places in the world. So I have a very much affection for Canada. Having disclosed that, I think the U.S. would be epically mistaken to try and walk away from Canada, not to find a way to continue the long-standing, strong relationships we have. And frankly, I think the Canadians in their election voted in Mark Carney, really a remarkable figure, by the way, in that he has led two central banks, not one. He's the only person, I think, alive who's done that. So he knows his economics. He knows trade and tariff. He knows currencies. He's a banker. I think it was a good choice for Canada, although I don't get to vote up there. Looked to me like a pretty good choice. And I think he had a very overall positive meeting with Donald Trump. He sketched out an obvious Canadian red line. We're not for sale. President Trump, being President Trump, said, never say never. But he kind of had a smile on his face. And the majority of the conversation was pretty positive. So I'm cautiously optimistic. We will renegotiate what is today called the USMCA, ourselves and Mexico. And by the way, kudos to Madam Sheinbaum, Claudia Sheinbaum, the president of Mexico. I'd say she has handled Donald Trump better than any other world leader so far. And I give her real credit for being strong, but also being smart and being flexible where she needs to be, but being clear on her red line, which is no U.S. troops operating inside Mexico. Bottom line, I think these three nations, Canada, U.S., Mexico, will renegotiate. We'll get there. It's going to be bumpy. From a U.S. perspective, we need Canada. They need us. I think both sides are going to recognize that. We're going to get to the right place.
Wonderful. Well, that's a positive note to end on, Admiral. Thank you so much for your time and insights, sharing with our clients. We're just grateful to have you here. And especially, I know you took time away from the Milken conference. So thank you so much. And thank you to all of our attendees. I know there were a few questions we didn't get to, so we can circle back with you on that. Oh, yes.
And I would just add thanks to NEPC. And if you had a question and we didn't have time, just email me. I'm happy to respond. It's real simple. Just my name, James.Stavridis, you can, let's use Carlisle for this. So at Carlisle, the name of the firm, carlisle.com. That's it. So send me your questions.
Admiral Stavridis, thank you so much. And thanks to your Carlisle colleagues as well for coordinating this. And this ends our presentation today. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.